listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. It's the holiday season, which around here is known as the not-so-wonderful time of year. Even without grief, the weeks leading up to the end of the year can be hectic, full of pressure, and might even highlight what we feel is lacking in our lives. Wrap some grief into that, and as many teens and young adults have said, the holidays can, excuse my language, suck. It's also a time of traditions, and one of my favorite Grief Out Loud ones is to invite one of my colleagues from Dougy Center to come on the show and talk about their personal experience with grieving during the holidays. I believe there's 7 of them now, and I've linked all of them in the show notes. Each one's a little different, so if you find yourself wanting more stories or tangible tips after this one, be sure to check them out. This year's episode is with Brennan Wood, who I've worked with for over 20 years now. Brennan is currently our executive director, but first came to Dougy Center as a teen when her mom, Doris, died of cancer 3 days after Brennan's 12th birthday. Since that time, Brennan's navigated almost 4 decades of holiday seasons, with grief along for the ride. This year, Brennan gave a TEDx talk, Grief is to Feel, Not Fix. And that seems especially accurate around the holidays. Brennan shares the trajectory she's traveled from the first holiday after her mom died, which was truly terrible, to now as an adult working to hold both the joy and the grief that can happen this time of year. Okay, here's our conversation. Brennan Wood, welcome back again to Grief Out Loud. This is your, 4th, 5th appearance. We're very grateful to have you back again.
Something like that. Yes, I'm so happy to be here with you, Jana. Thanks for having me.
It's hard to imagine a listener doesn't know who you are, but in case they do not, can you give us a brief tour of your landscape of grief?
Happy to. So I am Dougy Center's executive director, and perhaps in this context, a bit more importantly, I am a pretty much lifelong griever, right? My mom, Doris, died 3 days after my 12th birthday. And my family did not have the tools to navigate her illness or death. And luckily, my dad had heard of Dougy Center. This was back in 1987. And Dougy Center was this fledgling 5-year-old organization that was started in Portland. Thank goodness. And I was lucky enough to get to go to Dougy Center after my mother's death. And it was the single most helpful thing that happened in my life after my mother's death. I went to Dougy Center. I volunteered after I finished my time in the program. I left Portland for about a decade. I came back 21 years ago now to work at the Dougy Center. I've been on staff for 21 years and executive director since 2015, so the last 10 years at this moment. Yeah. I will also share that my father died when I was 36. So, gosh, that's 14 years ago now, which is wild. So, I feel like that amongst all the other things that happen in life have certainly given me a perspective on loss and grief that shapes who I am on a daily basis.
This is a question that in over 20 years of knowing you, I've actually never asked you before. So you may not have an answer to it. But when you were at Dougy Center, and for listeners who aren't familiar, Dougy Center, we have peer grief support groups for kids and teens and their family members after a death, also before a death. And part of Dougy Center's model is that there's an opportunity to sit and talk, but there's also an opportunity to go to different expression rooms in the house. Knowing what I know about you, I have a sense that maybe you never left the talk room, but if you did leave the talk room, what was your go-to expression room at Dougy Center?
Oh, well, you haven't ever asked me that. And the answer is I never left the talking room. But actually, in my group, interestingly enough, I don't think any of us really ever left the talking room in my group. I was in a teen group. I started when I was close to 13, I believe, maybe even, I could have even been 13 when I started. I'm not exactly sure because it took some time after my mother's death. But I don't remember people really leaving. I do remember that we would draw or do things like that in the room, but I don't think much leaving happened. My group was pretty focused on talking.
Not
And I'm a
surprising.
talker.
Yeah, not surprising knowing what I know about you. So, this is our annual tradition at Dougy Center where we do, or on Grief Out Loud, I should say, our annual tradition on Grief Out Loud to do a episode conversation about grief and the end of calendar year holidays, because there's many of them.
Yes.
And one lucky staff person gets picked by me to come have that conversation today. That's you. And I know we are going to talk about the holidays, but to kind of set the stage, I wanted to briefly just talk about the TEDx talk you gave this year in Portland. And the title of it was Grief is to Feel, Not to Fix. And when in your own grief, from teenage until 36 until now, did you really get it that grief is to feel, not to fix?
Such a great question. I think for me, one of the just wonderful parts of being at Dougy Center as a teenager was the permission to feel my grief. I had a tremendous amount of people that were very well-intentioned, wanting to take my pain away, wanting to fix it, wanting me to not hurt. Mostly adults, but also my peers, my close friends. And that was incredibly unhelpful to me. So although I probably didn't have the words for it at the time, I might not have been able to tell you exactly why Dougy Center impacted me so much. A huge part of the impact of Dougy Center was this permission to feel what I was feeling, to experience the full range of emotion that I was feeling around my mother's death. So I really think it started then. I don't know if I would have, again, been able to articulate it in the same way, but truly the impact that Dougy Center had on me was this permission to feel what I was feeling, to feel the sadness, to talk about my mom, to remember my mom. And that changed everything for me.
Now there's the external pressure to fix the grief, and then there's the internal pressure to fix the grief. And I don't know if this is true for you, but even me being in this field for so long, I practice maybe not in my personal life. I'm not that great at not trying to fix it for people, but in my professional life, I try really hard to make the space to feel, not to fix. Mm-hmm. But I know I don't always give myself that same space. So I'm curious for you personally, like in your own life, do you feel like you're able to embody that I'm not trying to fix it for myself?
Again, such a great question, Jana. It's tough. I think it's tough. I think we should ourselves a lot. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. We should be feeling this. So it's tough. I think there's a balance. I will say that I think that as I continue to evolve in my life and grow, I think that being more and more comfortable with the idea that it isn't all bright and shiny all the time, I'm increasingly more comfortable with that idea. And it isn't always easy because we want it to be bright and shiny, so it isn't always easy to just let ourselves feel the feelings. But I'm working on it, and I hope others are too.
Well, speaking of bright and shiny, because I know the winter holidays or the end of calendar year holidays, since folks of you in the Southern Hemisphere, it's not winter, is a time where there can be a lot of pressure, internal and external, for things to be bright and shiny. And I'm curious what you remember about those first few holiday seasons after your mom died.
Oh, those first few holiday seasons after my mom died were rough, and they were rough for all of us. I remember the first Christmas after my mom died, which would have been about 4 months after she died. We went out of town to go visit family, and it was terrible. It was just awful because we didn't do any of our traditions, and we had so many traditions. We didn't do anything normal at all. And I just remember, I can remember where I was sleeping. I was sleeping on the floor because there weren't enough beds and it was hard and awful and I barely slept. And I remember being up laying Christmas morning, just laying there at like probably 3, 4 in the morning, just wishing that it were different. So rough, rough first couple of holidays for sure. I think that has definitely evolved. And there now can be both things can happen simultaneously. Tremendous joy. And of course, there's always tremendous sadness that my mom isn't here to celebrate. My dad isn't here to celebrate with me and my family.
In those, like I know the first year you went and did something totally different, which felt terrible. And I think that is
Yes.
something that a lot of families grapple with. Like, do we scrap it all and do something completely different? Do we keep the
Right.
traditions? Over like the first 3, 4, 5 years, did your family start to bring some of those traditions back, or did it kind of just never go back in that direction?
Yeah, it never went back. And I think that that's one of the things my dad struggled with being present with all of it, I think, in so many ways. And so everything changed in my life when my mom died. Like everything. Nothing ever went back to what it was before in any way. And I think that's one of the reasons why at a pretty young age, I really tried to create my own way of doing things, create my own path. And I moved away from Portland when I was 19 for the decade I mentioned earlier. And that time, like I didn't come home for the holidays. I didn't really spend time much with family over the holidays. My sister, some, because we often lived in the same cities. But no, we didn't ever go back to anything the same as it was before. And I also think that's why I've tried so hard to just create new memories, new celebrations, new traditions, new rituals for myself in my own life and with my own family.
What were some of those early traditions around the holidays that you started to create for yourself?
Oh gosh, it's hard to remember some of them. What I will say is that, my mom was so incredible at creating magic. She was just an amazing person, an amazing mother, so much fun. And so our early holidays were just filled with so many cool things. She would do the Santa Claus boot prints with on the hearth and string a red thread that would get snagged on our fireplace. And, there were just so many things she did to try to make it fun and magical. And so I think over time, I tried to implement some of that, but also I think a key thing for me in the earlier years of doing it on my own was service because I didn't have necessarily have as much family around me. I wanted to be of service to others, and that I think really helped me navigate kind of my 20s. I would do a lot of volunteering on actual holidays to get out of my own head, to get out of my own way, and just be of service to others. And I think sometimes that can be a really helpful thing to realize that yes, you may be struggling. I might have had my own struggles, but there's, you kind of can always look and see somebody who may have it better than you, but you can always look and see places where there's need and places where you can be of service. And for me, that has always been something that's been really helpful. So that I think has been a thread throughout my entire adult life is finding ways to serve others around the holidays. And that can be as simple as delivering meals for Meals on Wheels people. For a long time when I came back to Portland, I would take my dad on holidays to go deliver meals, and he would sit in the car, and I would just be the person to go and deliver. And sometimes he'd come up to the door too, but that was helpful. I've done this thing with my own family called Socks and Snacks, where we just pack up bags with socks and snacks and water and hand warmers and just find people that need that on holidays to go and hand those out to. So really just trying to find ways to shift my own inner perspective and my own lens through which I'm seeing things has been something that I think has been a consistent thread throughout my adult life.
Yeah, and that's one of the tips that we always include in our holiday worksheet plan tip sheet around like making it about somebody else, especially if there's a particular cause that was important to the person who died, that can be a way to have that connection. Speaking of your dad, I know, we talked about after your mom died, everything changed and it never went back to how it was and all the traditions that you lost with her.
Yeah.
But for a lot of kids and teens, they lose, if they still have a parent who's alive, they lose how that parent was previously at the holidays. And I'm curious what, as a kid, you missed about your dad, even though he was still alive, like what his role was at the holidays.
Yeah, my dad, unfortunately, he changed when my mom died. And, my mom died at 36 years old. My dad was 38 when my mom died. They had 3 kids. They worked every day together. They had been together since high school. So, so much of my dad's way of being in the world was so intertwined with my mom and who my mom was. And together they created this family and this way of being, to a fault, we were, all expected to be happy and have fun pretty much all the time. Like that was the norm in my early childhood. And yeah, I would say that for me, certainly my mother dying was hugely impactful, but the aftermath of that was equally as impactful because there never regained any sense of consistency or normalcy really for me. And searching for that consistency and normalcy definitely became a thread throughout my life, of like wanting to find that home and roots and family to feel like I could experience some of that again.
Well, that leads me perfectly into my next wondering, which is, through your teens and your 20s, it sounds like there was a lot of like, how do I do this holiday in a way to sort of parent myself, right? To like, how do I create this consistency and routine for myself? And then later in life, you moved into a role of parenting and wondering how you've worked to create traditions in your own family and which of those maybe have a thread back to your mom.
Yeah. Oh, so many. And, I'm not a traditional parent, but I've been so happy to be a step parent and a bonus parent, and finding that joy and magic in the holiday season, just it fills my cup so much. So, of course I want to bring that to those in my life who I love. And that's also true with like, friends and friends' kids and, my community of people. And so, yes, I definitely have tried to create random traditions that are very different than the traditions of my childhood. But, one thing that we have done consistently for the last, decade is we did Elf on the Shelf, but we did it in a very non-traditional way. We had a very naughty elf, a naughty teenage elf. And that, just has been a lot of fun for our family. I started this tradition on New Year's it's loosely based on another tradition, which I'm going to get the name wrong if I even try to say it. So I'm not, but it's around 12 grapes. And so on New Year's, we always have 12 grapes and at midnight, eat those 12 grapes and make 12 wishes. I just have always tried, I think, to find things to create a bit of celebration. What I will say is that my mom I have said this often, like she perfected the art of celebrating, of making things a celebration every day. I mean, random things turned into celebrations. Picking up takeout food became, a quest for a magic whatever. Like there was always something extra about what we did just on a daily basis. And so then the holiday seasons, any holidays really, I remember an Easter where literally she painted mud rabbit footprints throughout our hardwood floors, throughout the entire house, because it was a rainy Easter and she wanted us to think the Easter Bunny had tracked mud through the house to then only have to like scrub her floors later. So, she just was really, really magical. And so I definitely have tried to do that in my own ways. It's big shoes to fill. I don't know that I quite fill them, but I want to bring that to my own life, but also to the lives of the people around me. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's over the top.
As your mom would be very, I think, proud of that over the topness.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, so far our conversation has really focused on the efforts that you've put into continuing to bring celebration and joy around the holidays. Now there's the other side of it, right? Of like the grief comes right alongside that. And there's traditions that are really focused on holiday times, maybe fun. But then there's traditions that we might bring into our holidays that are actually truly connected to our grief or ways of honoring our grief. And I'm curious if you've had any of those throughout the years.
Yeah, I think that is really important. And I think that we do put so much pressure on ourselves year round for everything to be okay and bright and shiny, as we talked about earlier. And it isn't all bright and shiny. It's just not. And I think that we need to have space for the other part of that too. And I think personally, what I've come to realize is we have to create space for both, and both exist. And therefore, by honoring both, we can feel the joy, because I think, it's like if we try to meet everything in the middle, it's fairly flat. So there has to be both, at least for me in my life, there has to be both. And having the room for those honoring moments, the moments that are griefy and hard and tearful, and those come and go. And certainly, my mom died 38 years ago now, and my dad died 14 years ago. So it's different. It has evolved, but it is certainly there. And it underlies a lot of things for me, both in the end of year holidays, but also throughout the years. The other thing that I would just say that I've tried to do is honor those in our lives who aren't with us anymore in small but meaningful ways. And sometimes that's things that only I know of, or only my husband and I know of. We've had a couple of really close people in our lives who've died over the last handful of years. And so when that has happened, I have at Christmas given my husband a really special hand-blown glass candle holder that's small, but it's from Glassy Baby, and they make very special, like hand-blown, and they're small, but they're beautiful, and they name them. And so I have gone for Christmas each year that has happened, and picked out one that the name and the glass reminds me of the person who has died, and given that to him at Christmas. And then those stay on our mantle year round, and we always have candles in them. And, at least a couple times a week, we will light those candles. And, we don't really ever talk about it. It's not like something that we then need to talk about, but it's there. It's a reminder. It's a moment in our home. It's a moment in our life where we can really honor that piece of things. And I think those things are important, and they can be very small. They can be very personal. It can be big and demonstrative too, and that's okay. But I would just say that doesn't have to be something we put pressure on ourselves around. It can also just be a moment where we stop and take a deep breath and think about the person, or notice when something happens that, gosh, I really wish I could have called my dad and told him that today. Those moments are important, and feeling those feelings and allowing that to be a part of our year round, but certainly our holidays, I think gives us permission to feel all the other wonderful feelings that can come from the holiday season.
I really appreciate that point of how these grief-centric traditions they can be sort of stealth, right? That those
Yeah.
candles are just beautiful candle holders that you have on your mantelpiece that you and your husband know what they are. And you might choose to share that with people who come over to your house and see them, but that it's just personal for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day for me, because I'm heading into, it's not the first Christmas since our dog Captain died, because he died on December 8th, but it's kind of the first, like, go get the Christmas tree, and because we do all that stuff. And so I was planning ahead because I, do this job, and I was like, all right, what am I going to do? And I thought, okay, I'll print up 30 photos of Captain around Christmas. So it'll be like an advent calendar. We'll just like have a new photo each day. And so I'm going through the photos and picking out which ones to print. And then I accidentally printed 92 photos of Captain at Christmas. So I was like, now I have 3 different advent calendar photo collages all over the house. So sometimes you go a little over the top in that way.
And that's okay too. And I think one of the things that I also think we all need to give ourselves permission to do is to also change course. Right? I think our best laid plans, best laid intentions can go absolutely perfectly, and that's great. Sometimes it all falls apart, and that's okay too. Like, I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do it the way that we have envisioned that we should do it or that we want to do it. And then sometimes, it just changes. And I think giving ourselves permission for it to just change is a really important thing, especially in those early holidays that, it's your first year navigating this, right? Like, I think I would give anybody permission to print the 92 photos and then they sit in a stack, and that's okay. All those things I think can happen and shift, and it's okay. If you're on your way to the holiday party that you thought you were going to be able to go to and you can't walk in the door, that's okay. I also say seek out people who get that so that they know. I hope I'm one of those friends where someone can say, the party started a half an hour ago and you know what? I'm not going to make it. And that's okay. Or I'm a hot mess and I still want to come. Yes, that's okay. Right? Giving ourselves and each other permission.
Yeah. And one of the other pieces you mentioned that I want to highlight is maybe pre-teaching that too, to like check in with yourself, give what are my options that I might want and need, and then letting the person that maybe you're going to their event or talking with your family so that everyone's not caught off guard by perhaps the last minute pivot that needs to happen.
Absolutely. And I think that's a huge thing that we can gift to each other as well, right? If it is somebody's first Christmas without their person or their important thing in their life, right? Like, we can gift that to one another. Like, hey, I've been through this before. I know that sometimes things need to change last minute. Let me know if that's what needs to happen here. That can be really helpful.
Not to take you back in time one more time, but I'm going to take you back in time again, because one of the things I know families can really grapple or wrestle with is if there are multiple kids in a family and someone dies and you're heading into anything, but we're talking about the holidays here, and kids have different wishes, needs, capacities. What do you remember about being in the dynamic with your 2 siblings? What role did you play and what role did they play? And like, how were your needs perhaps different from your siblings?
Yeah, I think my needs were really different from my siblings simply because, probably for more reasons than this, but also because a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 12-year-old are just at really different places, and I was the youngest. And I think that my older siblings were I actually said this in my TEDx talk, but just more easily able to escape the chaos, like they could my brother could hop in the car and drive away, often taking my sister, right? They had overlapping friend groups and overlapping friends, and they had lots of people driving in their life. Like, it was just easier for them to escape the chaos. And I was 12 and it was just different. I think we did have really different needs. I also think that I have always been the person who like carries the both metaphorically and also physically carries the stuff, right? Like I am always, I often am the person that remembers anniversaries, that remembers death anniversaries and remembers birthdays and like I am the person that carries that in a lot of ways. And then also has really, for my family, been the one to carry the stuff. I'm the one that has the family photos. I'm the one, I have all of that. So I think some of that's personality, some of that's, the order of our, you know, the birth order, all of that. So yeah, we have had different needs. And I think that that's really important for families to recognize and to try as much as possible to give kids choices that like not everybody in the family has to do the same thing. So maybe you have a holiday tradition where the entire family goes to a certain event, right? And, I would encourage families to sit down and talk in advance and say, we always go to this particular event. Do we want to do that this year? Do we want to do something different this year? Does some of us want to go and some of us not want to go? And then seek out support from your community or other family members so that maybe one of your kiddos says, I absolutely want to go, but nobody else wants to go. Well, maybe your best friend or an aunt or a cousin or someone wants to take that kid to that tradition, like trying to find that middle ground. It can be really hard. It's never perfect, but really giving each member of the family some autonomy to make some decisions around traditions and around expectations of what's important and meaningful to them.
Yeah, and I really love the idea that just because you don't want to do something doesn't mean that the person who does want to do it can't go do it now, if possible, right? Can we call on community and other networks of support to make that happen? And
yeah.
I just had an idea too, we usually encourage like sit down and have a conversation. And I was like, oh, I bet that's hard sometimes to sit all together and be like, I don't want to. So I'm wondering if there might be some way for families to incorporate like a silent ballot or something where you could submit it on your index card of what you want to do and not have to like say it out loud.
I would even say, and I know this is going to sound probably wild, but you could do like an online survey where it's an anonymous, you know what I'm saying? Like kids are so tech savvy these days, right? Like there's 100 ways to bake a cake. And so, I would say explore all of your options because, it takes flexibility. It takes some creativity. And I think it really also takes trying as much as possible to be present with all of it, which can be so tough, especially in those first, handful of years. I think also giving yourself permission that it's just going to be tough and you're not going to get it 100% right. I have a lot of grace for my dad at this point in my life. I didn't always. I definitely did not always, but I have a lot of grace for him and what he was going through. And, I think at the end of his life, we were both able to have some really meaningful and important conversations around that where, I was able to say, it wasn't enough for me. Like what happened back then, you didn't get it right for me and you're off the hook. It's okay.
Yeah. That was your capacity and it wasn't what I needed.
Yeah.
And it's what you could do.
Yeah. Which is, it's big and tough.
Tender to go back in that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny because, it's so many years later and here I am getting teary talking with you about the holidays, it's ever present.
That seems really vital to mention. That for so many folks, they think, okay, I just got to get through the first one and it's going to definitely get easier after that. Yeah. And how many people say, I got through the first one holding my breath and slightly dissociating.
Yep.
I don't even remember what happened. And now the second one comes and we're more conscious of life and more conscious of our grief and the loss and the permanence of that loss.
Yeah.
And so for folks, who second, third, fourth holiday somehow continues to feel harder, like there's nothing wrong with you.
There is nothing wrong with you, and it ebbs and flows. And yes, second, third, fourth can be harder, and not to scare anybody who's gearing up for the first by any stretch. Don't want to do that. And I think that again, we just have to give ourselves permission for it to be truly what it is, and hopefully in that find moments of calm and find moments of even, dare I say, joy, and, find moments of gratitude. I think gratitude for me has been so important in honoring my own grief experience, is just trying to hold on to the gratitude I have for who my mother was, the lessons I've learned from her life and from her death, what my childhood was, in the good and the bad, but just to try to hold gratitude, I think can really be helpful and really hard and not something we can prescribe to others.
Well, I feel like we can't end this conversation without just acknowledging where we are in December of 2025 and all the things that are unfolding, for
Yes.
you personally, locally here in our Portland metro area, nationally across the world. So I'm just given that, how are you in this year, this moment, sitting with the idea that grief is to feel, not fix, and the end of your holidays are right around the corner?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's a big one. I think it's a really important question in this moment where so many people are navigating so much, and it does feel like too much, and it does feel overwhelming. And I believe that grief is to feel, not fix, and therefore this might be a hard one this year for me, for others. And I think, again, trying to center ourselves around the most important things for ourself, whatever that looks like, right? To try to have, even if it's just a very small practice of something that brings you some comfort, can be so helpful. It's interesting because we've talked a lot about tradition together in this conversation, and I think tradition is a big piece of it. The other piece of it that I would just say that we haven't named, but we've talked a bit about, is ritual, which is slightly different than tradition. And rituals can be something that can be brand new, for your family, for yourself. I know so many people who have just very small, very quiet rituals that they do to center themselves and ground themselves that I think are so powerful in our lives. And I would say that in times of greater uncertainty, where things feel bigger and messier and perhaps a lot more, I don't know, tentative, or just not firm, not we like, maybe we aren't feeling like we're on solid ground. Like, how do we do those small things to ground ourselves? Certainly there can be bigger things and traditions, but like even just those moments of saying, okay, I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to do what I know to do to center myself, ground myself, and be present for myself in this moment. It's tough. It's tough. And I think, here we are, in early December, and I think we're all in some ways bracing ourselves a little bit. And I hope that collectively, we can each find those moments for ourselves, and gift some of those moments to each other, so that we know that, I think one of the things I also said in my TEDx talk, is that, when we can show up for one another, it creates a shared understanding that we're not alone in this world. And I think that that's what Dougy Center does. I think that's what peer support does. I think that's what this podcast does for people, is gives us a sense that we're not in it alone. And the more we can try to ground ourselves in that together over this holiday season, I think, the better off we will all collectively be. So I hope that's a little bit helpful.
Is there an example of a ritual that you have been turning to lately?
That's a great question. I do a really random thing for myself often, which is when I'm taking a shower every morning, I put one hand on the cold tiles and I take 3 deep breaths and I just kind of remind myself like I am here in this moment. I am starting this day. Today is the day. Today is a new day. Like, I just try to take that moment early on in my day. You and I both do a bit of tapping, and that can be really helpful, especially in the car. Although people look at me like I'm crazy when I'm tapping the top of my head or the side of my eye. But just for me, I think it's often around just like reminding myself I'm here in this moment. I see things often that say like, memes or things that say like, just remind yourself that you have 100% track record so far of getting through every hard day. And I do. I'm here. I have 100% success rate so far in getting through every day. So those are the things that I look to. And they may sound really silly, but it helps me.
Well, there's so much about that translates well to different ways of doing it, right? Which is something sensory to ground us in the moment, some way of talking to ourselves to be like orient to like, where am I literally? Like, what day is it? So that I can sort of step forward from that. Yeah, I just appreciate that. So thank you for giving us a little window into your personal world of ritual and for delineating between like what's maybe a holiday tradition, but what's a personal ritual that we can bring into the moment to help us feel like we have maybe a smidge more wherewithal capacity to make decisions moving forward of how we want to navigate this season. So,
yeah. And giving ourselves permission that it's not going to always look bright and shiny, and that's okay.
Just the other day, I love a Christmas tree. I do love a Christmas tree. And our tree is fine this year. And I'm really mad at it.
Oh.
And I haven't been able to quite figure out, why am I so mad at this tree? So I'm sitting with like, what ritual do I need to come up with to make friends with this Christmas tree so I don't feel so combative with it every time I walk in the house?
Yes. Isn't it wild, the things like that come up and that we do and that are in our brains? I mean, it's truly, it's so, and thank you for sharing that, Jenna, because I think that helps people to really feel more normal. I think we're all in this together, and how can we support one another in just recognizing that it's okay to be mad at your Christmas tree this year.
I still love it, but I'm also mad at it sometimes.
Yep. Both and. That's the story of grief, right? Is both and.
Well, Brennan, thank you for making time in such a whirlwind of a calendar that I know that you keep to come carry on the tradition of Grief Out Loud, of having an annual episode all about the end of calendar year holidays with a Dougy Center staff person. So yeah, grateful for your personal story, your professional knowledge, and just all that you bring to the conversation.
I'm always grateful to talk with you, Jana. Thanks for having me.
And listeners, I will link in the show notes to Brennan's TEDx talk. So please go check that out. Grief is to feel, not to fix. And I'll also link to some of our past Grief at the Holidays episodes with other Dougy Center staff members. There's some that are more narrative of people's personal experiences and some that are more like how-to tips. So I'll link to all of those. And thank you, listeners, each and every time for tuning in to Grief Out Loud, for making the show meaningful, for sharing episodes with people who could be helped or supported in some way by the conversations that we are having here. If you want to connect with me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. dougy.org is our main website, where you'll find information about our local programming, all of our free downloadable resources like tip sheets, including our holiday plan worksheet, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. Always excited to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.